The world of Arendor had always been quiet. Its forests whispered with the wind, and the rivers sang soft songs that no one rushed to hear. The cities, made of shining metal and glass, rose gently from the land as if they were part of it, not separate from it. Humans lived there, not in hurry, but with care. Every building reflected the sunlight in a way that did not blind, but warmed the heart. The people of Arendor knew the value of quiet, and they held it like a treasure. Dr. Leora Venn, a young biologist, walked along the edge of one of the great forests that bordered the city of Kethril. She always felt a special connection to this place. Trees here had leaves that shimmered in gold and silver under the morning light. The air smelled of damp moss and the sweetness of hidden flowers. Every creature, from the tiniest insects to the birds that soared above, moved with a calm purpose. Leora often thought the forest was watching, not in a threatening way, but with gentle curiosity. This morning, however, something felt different. Leora paused, letting her gaze move across the familiar landscape. The birds were silent. Not a single leaf stirred with the usual wind. Even the streams, which usually made soft gurgling sounds, seemed still. It was as if the entire forest had taken a deep breath and was holding it. Leora's heart felt tight. She had studied this forest for years and had never felt this stillness. She adjusted the strap of her sensor pack and looked at her instruments. Nothing unusual showed up. The air had normal humidity. The temperature was steady. The usual wildlife readings were present, but something about the energy of the forest was off. A faint vibration ran through the soil, so slight that one could easily miss it. Leora bent down, placing her hand on the ground, and felt it. It was soft at first, like a heartbeat far below the earth. Then it grew, almost imperceptibly, a rhythm that pulsed with something alive, yet unlike any creature she had known. "Leora!" called a voice from behind. She turned to see Dr. Kyle Marvin, her research partner, jogging lightly toward her. Kyle was older, with a gentle smile and eyes that always seemed to see what others missed. "You feel it too, don't you?" he said, glancing at the ground. Leora nodded. "Yes, something is moving, but I don't know what. And it's not like anything we've recorded before." Kyle looked at her thoughtfully. "Maybe it's just an animal, a fast one. Or maybe something new has emerged. Arendor has surprises sometimes." Leora shook her head. "No, it's more than that. The energy, it's intelligent. I can't explain it yet, but I can feel it." The two of them moved deeper into the forest, careful not to disturb anything. The soil underfoot glowed faintly in places, where moss and small fungi absorbed sunlight and released it slowly. The air was thick with life, yet strangely the forest seemed to part around them, as if letting them pass without touching. Then it happened. A streak of movement flashed at the corner of Leora's eye. She gasped, barely stepping aside in time. It was fast, faster than any animal she had ever seen. It moved like liquid wind, barely disturbing the leaves. The streak vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. Leora's heart raced. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Kyle squinted. "Yes, but it's gone now. Too fast to track with eyes alone." Leora pulled out a small sensor device, placing it carefully on the ground. It blinked, recording vibrations and energy flows. They followed the trail, moving silently through the glowing undergrowth. The trail led them to a clearing where the sunlight broke through in silver shafts. There was no creature in sight, only a pattern in the soil. It looked almost like the shape of a running animal, but with curves and lines no animal could make naturally. "It's leaving marks," Leora said softly, kneeling to examine the ground. "But these aren't just footprints. It's creating something, like it's drawing as it moves." Kyle nodded slowly. "Maybe it's trying to communicate." They set up more sensors. small devices that could record movement, energy flow, and even subtle changes in the air. Leora felt a mixture of fear and excitement. This was not just a discovery. It was an encounter with something that might change how humans understood life on Arendor. The day passed without another sighting, but every so often they would feel that faint vibration again, pulsing beneath their feet like a distant drum. Birds stayed away, and the forest remained unnervingly still. Leora and Kale returned to their research lab at dusk, their minds buzzing with possibilities. That night, as Leora lay in her quarters, she watched the city lights of Kethrall twinkle below. Everything seemed normal, yet she could not shake the feeling that something was moving beyond the city, something aware of her, of everyone. She closed her eyes and listened. Even in the quiet of the city, she could sense the rhythm beneath the earth, like a heartbeat of the planet itself. The next morning, reports came from across the forest. Hikers and workers spoke of fleeting shadows and strange glowing trails. None of it made sense. No one could catch or even fully describe the movement. It was always gone before they could get a closer look. Leora and Kale gathered their team. Drones were deployed, sensors scattered, and energy readings taken. Yet the entity was always one step ahead. It seemed to enjoy being watched, but never captured. As the days went by, the entity's movements became more complex. It was no longer just running in straight lines or simple curves. It was creating patterns in the landscape, shapes that glowed faintly under the morning sun. Sometimes the patterns looked like spirals, other times like lines forming a mesh across the forest floor. Leora began to think of it as an artist, or maybe a teacher. It was showing them something. But what? One afternoon, while following the trails, Leora noticed a small flower that had been wilted for weeks. She touched it gently, and the petals opened as if waking from a deep sleep. She looked around and realized that wherever the trails passed, plants seemed healthier, streams clearer, and the air more vibrant. The entity was not harming the forest, it was nurturing it. "This is incredible," Leora said, eyes wide. "It's healing the land, Kale. Everything it touches comes alive." Kale knelt to examine a patch of moss. "It's as if it's redistributing life energy, moving it from one place to another. We've never seen anything like this." The team spent nights observing, recording, and analyzing. Leora started to see patterns in the movement. The entity avoided humans and machines but seemed curious about their presence. It sometimes circled drones or sensors, as if inspecting them, before vanishing in a flash of speed. The more they studied it, the more they understood that it was not just alive. It was intelligent. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Leora sat by a stream, thinking. She could still feel the pulsing energy under the ground. The entity was everywhere, yet nowhere. She whispered into the quiet, almost as if hoping it would hear her. "We don't mean to harm you. We want to understand. Can you show us what you are?" At that moment, a streak of movement passed across the water. The surface rippled, catching the last sunlight, and for a brief moment, Leora thought she saw the outline of something tall and elegant, moving faster than the eye could follow. It stopped for an instant, almost acknowledging her, then continued into the forest. Her heart pounded. It was real, it was intelligent, and it was reaching out in its own way. That night, Leora barely slept. Her mind raced with questions. Where had it come from? Was it native to Arendor, or had it appeared suddenly? Why had it chosen to reveal itself now? And most importantly, what did it want from them? The next morning she walked through the city streets. Everything seemed peaceful, yet she felt a strange energy beneath her feet, humming softly, moving unseen. People passed by, unaware of what was happening beneath the surface. Birds sang and the wind blew, But Leora knew that this was only the surface. Something extraordinary was running across the planet, shaping the land, teaching them without words. She reached her lab and looked out over the city. The entity's trails stretched across the forests beyond, glowing faintly in patterns she could barely comprehend. She knew that understanding it would take more than days or weeks. It would take patience, observation, and a willingness to see the world differently. And so, Dr. Leora Venn began her work. She would follow the runner, not to capture it, not to control it, but to learn from it. She would let it teach humanity how to see life as it truly was, alive, connected, and moving in harmony. The world of Arendor had always been quiet. But now something had begun running, and everything was about to change. The forest was alive in ways that humans could not fully see. Dr. Leora Venn and her team had spent days following the streaks of movement, observing from a distance, and recording the faint energy pulses that rippled through the ground. Every morning the forest seemed to welcome them, and every evening it returned to its quiet, gentle state, as if nothing had happened. Yet Leora knew better. Something extraordinary was moving among the trees, faster than any human could run, more aware than any animal they had known. On this particular morning, the sun had just begun to rise, spilling golden light over the crystalline leaves of the trees. Leora and Dr. Cale Marvin walked along the path, where the glowing trails had appeared the previous night. Small flowers, their petals shimmering faintly, leaned toward the light as if acknowledging the new day. Leora bent down to touch one, feeling warmth radiate through her fingers. "It's like the forest itself is awake," she murmured. Kyle nodded, eyes scanning the undergrowth for the slightest movement. "Look at this," Cale said, pointing to a faint line in the soil. The trail was fresh, unlike anything they had recorded before. It curved and twisted in impossible patterns, yet it did not disrupt the natural growth of plants. Leora knelt to study it. She could feel the energy under the soil, pulsing lightly as though the planet itself was breathing. She realized that the patterns were not random. They followed a rhythm, a sequence that repeated and varied at the same time. "It's communicating," she said softly. "I think it's showing us something." Cale frowned. "Communicating? How do you mean?" "It's running. That's all we know." Leora shook her head. "Not just running. Look at the way the trails curve. Look at the glowing energy left behind. It's forming designs, shapes. Something is guiding its movement. Something intelligent. It wants us to see these patterns." The two of them followed the trail deeper into the forest. They moved carefully, leaving the smallest footprints, trying not to disturb the delicate ecosystem around them. The forest seemed to respond to their presence. Leaves swayed gently, streams whispered softly, and small creatures peeked out from hiding, but did not flee. Leora felt a sense of harmony that went beyond observation. It felt as though the forest itself was aware of them and accepted them. Then, suddenly, the streak appeared. A flash of movement blurred past them at impossible speed. Leora barely had time to glance in its direction before it vanished among the trees. Kyle's mouth fell open. "There! Did you see that?" "Yes," Leora said, her heart racing. "It's closer than before, and it's not afraid of us. It's curious." They paused, letting the forest settle around them again. Leora held her sensor up, scanning the air, the ground, the energy flowing through the trees. The readings were unlike anything they had ever recorded. Vibrations moved in pulses, shifting in waves that traveled faster than sound. She adjusted the sensor to record the frequencies, hoping to capture some part of the entity's presence. Over the next few hours, the team observed a fascinating behavior. The entity seemed drawn to energy, but not in the destructive way humans might expect. Where it passed, leaves turned greener, water sparkled clearer, and flowers that had drooped opened gently toward the light. Streams that had slowed to a trickle began flowing steadily again. Even the air seemed fresher, carrying scents of moss, wet earth, and blossoms in a pattern that followed the entity's movement. "It's not just moving through the forest," Kale said, finally understanding. "It's improving it, healing it." Leora nodded, eyes wide. "It's redistributing life energy. It's alive, yes, but it's more than that. It's intelligent. It knows what the forest needs." As the day wore on, they followed the trails through dense groves, across streams, and over hills. Each time the entity appeared, it moved in patterns that seemed to respond to the environment. Sometimes it ran in spirals around old trees, tracing lines of energy that converged like threads of light. Other times it darted along streams, brightening the water as it passed. Leora realized that it was showing them something essential. The forest and the planet itself was alive in a way humans had only begun to imagine. One afternoon, Leora set up a small platform with sensors, cameras, and gentle lights to try to capture the entity's patterns more clearly. She did not want to trap it or interfere, only to observe. They hid behind trees and watched. A flash of silver and gold streaked past. The sensors recorded light pulses, vibrations, and energy flows. Leora's heart raced as she watched the patterns form. The entity circled the platform, then darted back into the forest. It was fast, playful, aware of them, yet completely free. "Look at the patterns it leaves behind," Leora whispered. "It's almost like a language." Kale examined the recordings. Language? Maybe. Or instructions. "It could be showing us how to live in harmony with the forest, like a guide." Leora's mind raced. Could it be that the entity existed to teach humans how to understand the planet? Could it be that Arendor itself had produced this being as a way of maintaining balance? She could feel the answers close, just beyond reach. As evening fell, the forest glowed faintly with bioluminescent plants. The entity's trails shimmered softly, illuminating hidden paths and creating shapes that seemed to float in the air. Leora knelt to trace one of the patterns with her fingers. Energy hummed beneath her touch, gentle and warm. She realized that the entity's movements were not only physical, but also energetic, leaving a temporary imprint that allowed humans to see the life flows of the forest. "This is incredible," Kale said softly. "We've never seen anything like this in our studies." Leora smiled, though her mind was still full of questions. "It wants us to see, but it also wants us to understand. It's not just here for us to watch. It's here to teach." The days that followed were filled with careful observation. Leora and her team learned to anticipate the entity's movements. They noticed it moved faster in some areas, slower in others, as if the environment dictated its pace. It avoided direct contact with humans but seemed to enjoy their presence in indirect ways, darting near sensors or cameras, creating patterns that hinted at playful curiosity. One morning, Leora woke before sunrise and went alone to the forest. She followed the faint energy pulse that she had learned to sense. The air was cool, filled with mist, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, without warning, the streak appeared again. It moved in wide circles, then zigzagged through the trees with breathtaking speed. Leora ran alongside, keeping as much pace as she could, though it was impossible to match. For a brief moment, the entity paused on a hill, its shape shimmering in the early light. Leora could feel a presence, almost like an awareness, and she whispered, "We don't mean to harm you. We want to learn from you." The entity darted around her, bright trails forming a spiral in the air, then vanished into the forest. Leora laughed softly, exhilarated. It was a moment of connection, a silent acknowledgement of understanding. Returning to the city, she shared her observations with her team. Together, they analyzed the patterns, energy flows, and environmental effects. Leora began to understand that the entity's movements were teaching them about the forest's needs, guiding them to see how energy, water, and life interconnected. She realized that humanity had much to learn. For years, humans had studied nature as something to observe or control. But here was a being showing them a new way, to follow, to understand, to live in harmony. Over the following week, the entity became more daring. It moved closer to the edges of the city, leaving trails that humans could see, yet still remained untouchable. People began to notice, not with fear, but with wonder. Children ran along the paths, trying to follow the glowing streaks. Scientists and researchers from across the city came to observe, learning from the patterns. The forest, once quiet and hidden, became a classroom for anyone willing to see. One evening, as Leora walked through a clearing, she saw something remarkable. A small, wilting tree had been touched by the entity's path. Its branches stretched upward, leaves glimmering as if painted with sunlight. A gentle warmth flowed from the soil into her hands when she touched the base of the tree. She realized then that the entity was not only intelligent, but also deeply connected to the land. It was like a guardian, moving swiftly to nurture life wherever it went. Kyle joined her, smiling. "It's teaching us something we should have known all along. Life is connected. Energy flows everywhere. We're part of it, not separate." Leora nodded, eyes filled with awe. "We're learning to see what has always been here. The world wasn't empty or quiet. It was waiting for us to notice." That night, Leora lay in her quarters, staring at the city lights far below. The forest hummed faintly in her mind, the memory of energy pulses lingering like a gentle song. She felt a sense of purpose, a quiet determination to follow the entity, to learn from it, and to share its lessons with humanity. The world of Arendor had always been quiet. But now something was running through it, teaching them without words, moving faster than fear or hesitation, leaving behind a trail of understanding and life. And Leora knew that this was only the beginning. The days grew longer and brighter, yet the forest of Arendor never lost its sense of wonder. Dr. Leora Venn and her team had spent weeks following the streaks of light, watching the mysterious runner move faster than the eye could follow. Each day brought new patterns, new energy pulses, and new mysteries. Leora had come to understand that this entity was more than just a creature. It was a teacher, a guide, and perhaps even the living expression of the planet itself. That morning, Leora and her team walked quietly through the eastern groves, where the sunlight filtered through silver-leaved trees. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of damp moss and blooming flowers. Streams whispered as they flowed, tracing gentle curves through the land. Everything seemed calm, yet Leora could feel the pulse beneath the ground, the faint vibration that hinted the runner was near. Kyle Marvin, her research partner, adjusted one of the mobile sensors. "It's been moving faster lately," he said. "Almost like it knows we're tracking it, and it's trying to teach us patience." Leora smiled. "Or maybe it's showing us something we cannot yet see." "The patterns are growing more complex. We have to understand them, not just follow them." The team split into two groups, careful to leave minimal footprints in the soft forest floor. Drones hovered silently above, recording every shimmer of energy, every change in the environment. As they moved deeper, Leora noticed that the trails of light left behind were forming interconnected shapes, spirals meeting straight lines, curves folding into loops. It was no longer a simple dash through the forest. It was creating intricate designs that seemed to tell a story. "Look at this," Leora whispered, pointing to a series of glowing lines across the soil. "It's forming a map or a message, but it's alive. It changes if we watch too closely." Kyle knelt beside her, studying the trail. "It reacts to us. Every time we adjust a sensor or step closer, it shifts. It's aware. intelligent, and it's playful. Leora nodded, feeling a shiver of excitement. She had never seen intelligence expressed this way. It was not through words or gestures, but through movement, through energy, through the living forest. They followed the trails for hours, moving with care, listening to the streams, watching the leaves. Occasionally, the runner would appear, a flash of light so fast it was almost invisible, leaving glowing traces that shimmered like liquid glass. At one point, the trail led them to a clearing where sunlight poured in from the sky above. In the center of the clearing was a patch of land where plants had wilted long ago. Leora knelt to examine it, and as she did, the runner appeared. It moved in circles around the clearing, leaving trails that pulsed with light. Slowly, the plants began to perk up. Leaves turned green, flowers opened, and even the soil seemed richer. Leora gasped. "It's restoring life," she whispered. "It's not just moving, it's teaching us how to care for the planet." Kyle nodded. "It's showing us what balance looks like. Look at the patterns. It's redistributing energy where it's needed." The team spent hours observing, recording, and analyzing. Leora realized that the runner's movements were not random. Every twist and turn followed the flow of energy in the land. It moved along streams that had slowed, around trees that needed sunlight, through fields that had lost vitality. The forest itself responded, growing stronger, brighter, more alive. In the evenings, Leora would sit quietly by the streams, thinking about what they had seen. She realized that the runner was teaching them not through words, but through action. Humans had always sought to control nature, to measure it and predict it. Yet here was a being showing them a new way, to watch, to learn, to move in harmony. One day, while examining a pattern near a small hill, Leora noticed something unusual. The trails were forming geometric shapes that repeated over and over, creating a design she could almost read. She sketched the shapes in her notebook, trying to make sense of the rhythm and flow. "Kale," she said, pointing at the sketches. "I think it's a language, or maybe a map of energy. Look at the way the curves meet the lines. They're not random. They're teaching us something." Kyle studied her sketches. "If it is a language, it's not one we've known before, but it's beautiful, precise, and alive. Maybe it's trying to show us how the planet thinks, how it flows." They decided to test the idea. Over the next few days, they carefully recreated some of the shapes on the forest floor, using gentle markers and soft lights. The runner appeared almost immediately, darting around the designs, leaving trails that complemented their shapes. It was as if the entity approved, or perhaps wanted to continue the lesson. Leora's excitement grew. She realized that the runner was teaching them a deeper truth. The planet itself had a rhythm, a balance, and energy flowed through it in ways humans had never imagined. By observing and mimicking these patterns, they could learn to live in harmony with Arendor, rather than simply existing on it. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, the runner moved through the forest in a way Leora had never seen before. It darted along streams, circled old trees, and then paused in a small clearing. Light shimmered in the air, forming a spiral that slowly expanded outward. Leora watched in awe as the spiral grew, connecting with other glowing lines, forming a network across the ground. She realized it was a map of the forest itself, showing energy flows, life currents, and areas that needed care. "This is it," she whispered. "It's showing us how to understand the land, how to nurture it, and how to move with it." Kale stood beside her, eyes wide. "It's incredible. The forest is alive, and it's teaching us to listen." The following days were filled with careful study. Leora and her team mapped the patterns, noted the energy flows, and observed how the runner interacted with the environment. They noticed that it was most active during dawn and dusk, when the balance of light and energy in the forest was perfect. It moved in bursts, then paused, leaving trails that pulsed gently, as if breathing. Children from nearby settlements began to visit the edges of the forest, drawn by the glowing trails. They ran along the paths, laughing and trying to follow the runner, never catching it, but always learning. Teachers and scientists began to take notes, realizing that the lessons were not only for biologists, but for everyone. The runner was showing them a new way to see life, energy, and connection. Leora found herself spending more time alone in the forest, observing the runner's movements, learning its patterns, and sensing the energy of the planet. She began to understand that this was not just a creature or an entity, it was a manifestation of Arendor's living spirit, moving to maintain balance and harmony. The runner was teaching humans a simple, profound truth. Life was not something to control or dominate, it was something to follow, understand, and nurture. One day, while following a series of complex patterns, Leora noticed the runner approaching the city's edge. It moved gracefully, leaving glowing trails that stretched into the streets. People gathered, amazed at the sight. Children pointed and laughed, while adults stared in wonder. The city had never seen anything like it, yet the runner did not fear them. It moved around them, leaving trails that pulsed gently, as if inviting them to watch, to learn, to participate. "This is incredible," Leora said, turning to Kale. "It's teaching us that we are part of this world, not separate from it. Every movement, every pulse, every pattern, it's showing us how to live in balance." Kale nodded. "And we're finally beginning to see it. Not just watch it, but understand it." The following nights, the team stayed close to the forest, recording every movement, sketching patterns, and noting energy flows. Leora realized that the runner's lessons were not limited to biology or energy. They were about connection, respect, and harmony. Humans had always sought to dominate nature, but the runner was showing them a new path, to move with the land, to care for it, and to recognize the life that flowed beneath every leaf, every stream, and every stone. As the sun rose one morning, Leora watched the runner streak across the forest in a breathtaking display of light and speed. Trails formed spirals and loops, connecting with energy flows she had mapped over the past weeks. She could feel the pulse of the planet beneath her feet, the rhythm of life, and the understanding that this entity was not just running, it was teaching them to run with it. Leora smiled, her heart full of wonder. She knew that they were only beginning to understand. The runner's intelligence was beyond anything humans had known, yet its purpose was clear: to teach, to nurture, and to guide. By observing, by following, by learning to move in harmony, humans could finally see the world as it truly was. And for the first time, the quiet of Arendor felt complete, not empty, not still, but alive in a way that humans could finally understand. The runner had begun to teach, and humanity was learning to listen. The forest of Arendor had never been more alive. Days passed with the gentle hum of energy moving beneath the soil, leaves shimmering in response to the runner's path, and streams flowing with newfound clarity. Dr. Leora Venn and her team had become attuned to the patterns of the mysterious entity. Each movement it made left trails of glowing light, energy, and life that humans could now read, understand, and follow. The city of Kethral had begun to change too, inspired by the lessons hidden in the forest. People walked with awareness, noticing the small shifts in the world around them, and learning from the rhythms of the planet. Leora had spent countless hours mapping the runner's trails, sketching its patterns, and studying the energy flows that radiated from it. Each observation brought new insights, revealing the interconnectedness of all life on Arendor. She had come to understand that the runner's intelligence was not only about movement, It was about balance, harmony, and care. The entity was showing humans how to live in connection with the world, rather than apart from it. One morning, Leora walked alone to a wide clearing where the runner's energy pulses were strongest. The sunlight poured down in gentle beams, and the forest seemed to glow in quiet anticipation. She knelt to touch the soil, feeling warmth and life flowing into her fingers. For a moment, she closed her eyes and simply listened. The vibrations beneath her feet were rhythmic and steady, a heartbeat of the planet itself. Suddenly, a streak of light appeared, moving faster than her eyes could follow. The runner paused at the center of the clearing, forming trails of glowing patterns that spiraled outward. Leora could feel the energy in the air, a gentle force that seemed to acknowledge her presence. She stood and watched, understanding that the entity was inviting her to follow, to learn, and to participate. Over the next few hours, the runner guided her through a series of patterns that mapped the flow of energy through the forest. Streams, hills, trees, and flowers were all connected in a vast network of life. Leora realized that the trails were not only teaching her about the environment, they were teaching her about harmony. Every curve, every spiral, every pulse of light represented a balance that must be maintained. By late afternoon, the team had gathered in the clearing. They watched in awe as the runner moved with grace and intelligence, weaving trails of light that connected every corner of the forest. Leora shared her observations, pointing out how each pattern reflected the flow of life energy, the areas that needed attention, and the paths where humans could walk in harmony with nature. "It's showing us that every action matters," Leora said softly. "Where we step, what we build, what we care for, it all affects the balance of life. The runner is teaching us to be responsible, to move with awareness, and to protect what we have." Kyle nodded, eyes wide. "We've been blind to so much. The forest, the streams, even the soil, they're alive in ways we never imagined. And it's been waiting for us to notice." People from the city had started visiting the clearing, drawn by the glowing trails. Children ran along the edges, learning to follow the patterns, while adults observed, taking notes and reflecting on the lessons they could apply in their own lives. The runner did not shy away. It moved around them, weaving patterns that encouraged observation, curiosity, and care. Over time, the humans of Arendor began to integrate the runner's lessons into their daily lives. Farms were planted following the flow of energy, cities were built to complement the natural patterns of the land, and rivers were restored to their full beauty. Forests previously ignored became vibrant and alive, and the people learned to move through them with respect and understanding. The runner had become a teacher, a guide, and a symbol of the planet's wisdom. Leora watched as a group of children traced one of the glowing trails, laughing as they followed the spirals and curves. The energy of the forest responded to their joy, glowing brighter and pulsing softly beneath their feet. She realized that the runner's teaching was not only about observing, it was about experiencing, participating, and feeling the connection to life. One evening, as the sun set, the runner moved to the highest hill in the forest. Its trails of light stretched across the land, forming a network of energy that connected the forest, streams, and fields. Leora and her team followed carefully, watching as the patterns grew more intricate, more beautiful, and more complete. She could sense that the entity was preparing to teach its final lesson. When they reached the hilltop, the runner paused. The light trails formed the shape of wings, wide and elegant, as if ready to take flight. The energy pulsed gently, a rhythm that Leora felt deep in her chest. She understood, without words, that the runner had shown humanity the ultimate truth. Life was not separate from them, and their actions could nurture or harm the balance of the planet. "It's time," Leora whispered to Kale. "It's teaching us that we are part of this world, not apart from it." The runner streaked across the hilltop, leaving trails that formed patterns extending into the forests, rivers, and cities. Leora felt a deep sense of understanding, as if the knowledge of the planet itself had flowed into her mind. Every curve, every spiral, every pulse of light was a reminder of the harmony that must be maintained. Over the following days, humanity embraced the lessons fully. The runner became a partner in learning, guiding people to see how their choices affected the world. Schools began teaching students to read and understand the energy flows. Engineers designed buildings in harmony with nature, and communities worked together to restore forests and streams. Life on Arendor became richer, fuller, and more connected. The runner continued its swift movements, always teaching, always guiding, never forcing. Leora watched it one morning as it darted through the forest, creating patterns that shimmered with light and energy. She realized that the planet itself had become a living classroom, and humans were finally learning the language of life. One evening, as the sky glowed with the colors of sunset, Leora stood alone in the clearing. The forest hummed softly, alive and vibrant. The runner moved past her, leaving trails that spiraled into the distance. She felt a sense of peace, understanding, and gratitude. The entity had not only guided humanity, it had helped them see the beauty of life, the importance of balance, and the power of connection. Kyle joined her, smiling. "We've learned so much. The planet feels alive now, in a way I never imagined." Leora nodded. "And it's only the beginning. We now know how to move with it, to care for it, and to live in harmony. That's the greatest lesson of all." The runner paused briefly, then streaked across the horizon, faster than the eye could follow, leaving trails that glowed softly in the fading light. Leora watched until it disappeared, feeling the rhythm of the planet beneath her feet. It was a heartbeat, steady and sure, and she knew that as long as humans continued to observe, learn, and care, Arendor would remain alive, vibrant, and balanced. In the days that followed, the patterns of the runner became part of the daily life of the people. Children learned to trace the trails with their own movements, adults observed and reflected, and communities worked together to maintain the harmony the entity had shown them. Arendor had transformed from a quiet, peaceful world into one where life thrived in connection and understanding. Leora often returned to the highest hill, watching the trails stretch across the land. She could feel the energy, the flow of life, and the intelligence of the runner in every leaf, every stream, every whisper of wind. The lessons were clear. Life is connected, energy flows, and humans have the power to nurture or disrupt the balance. The runner had chosen to teach not by force, but by movement, by example, and by the simple act of running. And so, the world of Arendor was forever changed. It was no longer quiet in the way it had been, but alive with understanding, harmony, and connection. The runner continued to move, swift and unseen at times, leaving trails of light that reminded humanity of the balance they had learned to cherish. Leora smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. Humanity had been given a gift, a guide, and a lesson in harmony. The world was no longer silent. It was vibrant, alive, and moving in rhythm with the pulse of the planet itself. And as the runner streaked once more through the forests, leaving trails of light that connected every corner of the land, Leora whispered into the quiet, "Thank you for showing us the way." The forest shimmered in response, the streams sang softly, and the air carried the gentle hum of life. Arendor had learned to run with its guardian, and in doing so, humanity had learned the greatest lesson of all, that life, in all its forms, is a gift to be cherished, nurtured, and understood.